Hey, thanks for joining me. Hope you're doing well. Hyperborea is the ancient Greek name for the land beyond the north wind, the North Polar Paradise of many names. In Pliny's Natural History by Pliny the Elder, written in the 1st century AD, Hyperborea is mentioned, like so many other Roman sources, as being past the Riphean Mountains, located on the border of the ancient land of Scythia, which we've shown in some Hyperborean maps of the Arctic as extending to southwest Asia, a few hundred miles from the pole. From this text, I quote, "Within a little are the Riphean Mountains, and a country called Pterophorus, for the resemblance of wings occasioned by the continual fall snow, a part of the world condemned by the nature of things, and immersed in thick darkness, having no sheltering places but the work of cold, the produce of the freezing north wind. Beyond those mountains, and beyond the North Pole, there is a happy nation whom they call Hyperborea, who live exceedingly long, and are celebrated for fabulous wonders. There are believed to be the poles of the world, and the very ends of the revolution of the heavens, having for 6 months together one entire day, and night as long. The region is open to the sun of a happy temperature, void of all hurtful impulse of air. The woods are their habitations, and the groves where they worship the gods man by man, and in companies. Discord and all disease are unknown, and they never die, but when they are satiated with life, when the aged men, having feasted and anointed their bodies, leap from a certain rock into the sea, this kind of sepulture is the most happy." Right away, we notice the location of this land being described as beyond the North Pole. This can only make sense in our model of the center crater continent, as the only way in is to go beyond the center crater. In 330 BC, Pytheas, explorer and navigator from the Greek colony of Phocia, wrote in his diary, "I am so eager to turn the prow of my ship toward the north. From there I must go to the throne of the sun. I want to go to Hyperborea, where I am at the top of the world, and I understand the beauty of the highest numbers. I want to go to the Hyperboreans." In Celtic mythology, there are demigods called the Tuatha De Danann. A collection of Celtic poems called Libor Gabala describes the Tuatha De Danann as having resided in the northern islands of the world, where they were instructed in the magic arts and imparted with timeless wisdom. These northern island cities were called Phaleus, Gorius, Findius, and Murius. What instantly comes to mind is the 4-island continent system that we've proposed and what's also described in ancient cosmology, and shown in a plethora of medieval maps. Could these 4 northern island cities be the Celtic analog to this 4-continent system? Another mythological connection to this is the Chinese land of Penglai, also known as the Isles of the Immortals. Like the 4 continents, this mythological land contains 4 floating islands. Scholars have even cited the North Pole as a location for at least 2 of these islands. The food there is miraculous, and fruits there preserve the eater from old age and death. Hyperborea, the land beyond the aurora borealis, has been described by various authors as being the polar origin of humankind. From the center, we experienced a solidification and devolution. Our bodies became less of light and more dense, more grounded in this third-dimensional realm. So the idea of evolution is actually a reverse of what has happened. Mankind did not begin as an ape, but progressively devolved into its beast-like condition, as it strayed physically and spiritually from its mystical homeland in the Arctic. What Jocelyn Godwin in Arctos the Polar Myth blames on succumbing to the demonic energies of the South Pole. I refer to William Warren, who in Paradise Found wrote, "The South Polar region is the location of demons and destructive divinities. The north is the hemisphere of the gods, and the south of the asuras, or demons." A Trip to the North Pole, or the Discovery of the 10 Lost Tribes as Found in the Arctic Ocean, is a book written by O.J.S. Lindelof. Published in 1903, it's said to be part true story, part fiction. It's about a whaling ship called the Mount Wollaston and its crew of 40 who accidentally sail into a hidden North Polar country. Although it's said to be semi-fictional, many of the details coincide perfectly with Admiral Byrd's and Olaf Jansen's accounts, which leads me to believe that, while it may not be completely accurate, it does serve as a form of soft disclosure, like so many of the myths and stories we've reviewed for the past year on this channel. The following is bits and pieces from this enchanting book. I will start from when after the crew penetrates what is referred to as an ice-bound circle, very similar to the ice mountains which encircle Shambhala, and the ones found in the Mercator maps. We had been traveling through a temperature of 105 to 110 below freezing point, when now, within 200 miles of the North Pole, we found a climate comparatively mild, and the nearer we approached to the pole, the milder was our climate. The aurora borealis, or northern light, seemed to give out a light and warmth that we had not before experienced. We were now within 100 miles of the North Pole, and began to discover coast foul. Can any human conceive the thought that passed through our minds on the possibility of discovering probably inhabited polar region? We were now sailing at a good pace, when the watch called out, "Land ahead." All was bustle and excitement. We had discovered the North Pole. There was no questioning that fact. Ducks and geese were seen as we progressed toward the north. What? Why, there were actually boats manned by white people like ourselves. Had we arrived at some European port? No, for when our ship approached, the boats fled before us into a beautiful harbor surrounded by a magnificent city, built after the style of ancient cities of 600 to 800 years BC. We landed in this capacious harbor and were received by what seemed to be a delegation of officials, but although we spoke several languages, we were not able to understand the men. They were dressed in loose costumes, something after the Persian style. They seemed very white, with a delicate transparency of feature. After leaving our boat, we landed on a well-made dock, paved with a sort of brown slate rock. We passed into a street paved with the same material, and to my surprise, the houses were all built of well-burned brick. We were led into what appeared to be a spacious palace. After crossing the court, we were ushered into this palace, and at last were brought before a beautiful lady on a throne decorated with all the paraphernalia pertaining to so dignified a position. It seems that our approach had been heralded to the queen, who this actually was, and who had ascended her throne for the purpose of finding out our mission, and also hoping that we might be deliverers of her people. After meeting the queen, the crew decides to circumnavigate the North Lands. We found the great mammoth in all his glory, towering high above the denizens of this newly discovered continent. We found a great many other kind of animals that are now extinct on the known land, also the large extinct bird, pterodactyl. We saw wolves, foxes, elk, deer, hare, bear, a sort of wild ox, and bands of chunky, short horses, which, though heavy-set, were nevertheless small. There were birds of different plumage, and trees of enormous height and thickness. We coasted around the peninsula and found on going on the east side that the conditions were about the same. We found a great many kind of nuts and plums, also a wild species of apples. We found several factories here, including one large soap factory, and a factory where all kinds of copper was manufactured. Here was also the largest jewelry establishment on the continent. We found that the people were very fond of jewelry and that they wore it in profusion. These delicate and seemingly transparent, beautifully formed women were decorated with large gold rings, plain and ornamental, also diamonds and precious stones of all kinds, that were made up in all manner of designs. The women were respected in as great a degree as the human mind could conceive of. It was no surprise to the people to see us, as they had a way of communication whereby it was heralded all over the continent that we had arrived, and that we were going to explore the whole Arctic continent. While we were in the city of Tabath, we were invited to attend a great feast day where you could see dancing. We found large sailing vessels plying between the different ports with merchandise of all kinds. We were meeting with something new every day. Although there were no railroad nor telegraphs, the continent was not so large but that they had an easy way of communication. But what attracts our attentions more than anything else was a flying machine, made of light metal, so light that it could float on water. There were other mechanical arrangements so ordered that the machine could go against the wind or in any direction that the director would place it. For urgent inland communication, the flying machine was used. Unlike many other accounts of the North Pole being purely a paradise, there is talk in this story of what's called the Northern Island being home to robbers and beasts. In Chapter 5, the crew gets into a battle with these robbers, leaving some of their men dead. I cannot reconcile why this account includes not only paradisal descriptions, but also conflict. Keep in mind, this is a semi-truthful, semi-fictional account, and the author himself stated so. Overall, this land is described as a peaceful one. It's even written that there was no standing army, as there was no one to fight with but the robbers. All of these accounts of the North Pole housing a hidden land with mystical attributes, which one can we believe? What is the truth? As July 2018 approaches, these are the very questions the North Seal Project is asking. Whatever the case is, we are feeling closer and closer to the journey to the center, to what's been called Hyperborea. Perhaps we are the beings who have incarnated in this time period in order to reopen the gates to Hyperborea. And with that, I say the following quote from Miguel Serrano's El Cordón Dorado. It is necessary for the arrival of various liberated beings who descend here, as avatars in the most critical moments, in the interlude of Sankhya or Sankhyansa, which they transmute in the Hyperborean Yuga of the heroes. They release their fire for some intense brief periods to shake the universe of the demiurge and frighten him. The avatar awakens the Hyperborean blood memory, destroys the shadows of the dream of Maya and Samsara, stirs the souls of heroes and carries them back to the combat of their great war. Dancing like Shiva, they remember their divine fatherland, the first Hyperborea. Thank you for watching. I love you all.